Hello and welcome. You are listening to the Gay with God podcast, a safe place for us to share our stories and support one another. How long did we know? What challenges did we face? Did we lose our faith? When did we find our way back home? Or are we still searching? The stories you hear on this podcast will melt your heart and strengthen your belief that in God, all things are possible, and you can be authentically gay with the God of your understanding. I am your host, Midge Noble, and I am very honored that you are here. Good morning, everybody. This is Midge Noble, the host of the Gay with God podcast and also the author of Gay with God, Reclaiming My Faith, Honoring My Story. Visit my website at gaywithgod.com, and you can find a link to the book where I can give you a signed copy. Give as in I will mail you a signed copy after you pay for the book. Or you can get your book wherever you find your reading material. So anyway, today we are talking about what does it mean to actually be loving. And we've talked about this, but I have a new twist for you today because I listened to a podcast called The Unintentional Heretic with the Reverend Greg Ferrand. Now, I've met him a couple of times. I'm friends with him on Facebook. However, he may not even know me if we pass by, but he's a brilliant guy. He's seriously brilliant. And he is just a loving, kind, walk the talk of Jesus kind of guy. In his most recent podcast, he interviewed our bishop of the Episcopal Church, Sam Rodman. And Sam Rodman is one of those walk the talk of Jesus kind of guys too. And he's the most gentle, loving person I've met. And he was the one that championed the beginning of the lay preachers and giving us permission to be lay preachers and the training behind it and all of that. He gave his total blessing of that. And I have a certificate as a lay preacher right now because he signed that when I had completed all of the classes and all the work. So that doesn't mean I'm a lay preacher forever. It gets renewed every 3 years. And for those of you who have followed me in the last year or two, I've not been doing really well physically. And that has really stumped my ability to be in the pulpit and to preach and to look for times that I could fill in because I was not able to be even at church for a while. So I am in my last year of lay preaching, and I hope that things will begin to be a little bit more predictable for me, and I will be able to do some lay preaching before my third year. Right now, things are a little bit in flux with that, and so I'm not sure if those of us who are currently licensed to be lay preachers will be renewed at the end of our third year. I'm just not sure. And it's just in that flux when we're not sure of something, like what do we do in this situation? What's going to happen in the future? As I listened to this interview with Bishop Sam, it was a bigger, broader conversation about really what is true and how do we use the lens of Jesus's walk basically to move into the world. That is an extremely oversimplification of what this episode was all about, and I have given you on the show page at empoweredmidge.podbean.com a link to Reverend Ferrand's episode with Bishop Sam, and I really commend this to you. I hope that you are able to get the link and to follow it and listen to it, because it was just such a beautiful, wonderful way to open our eyes to a path that we really want to embrace for ourselves, but we are sometimes a little clumsy about how to do it. So one of the quotes from this podcast talked about being loving, and sometimes we don't know how to be loving. We all want to be, but in this environment that we're living in this whole regime, finding the loving response, finding a way to temper our own anxiety, which for me, anxiety turns into anger. to protect myself. And so having to always walk that walk and that dance of, just reacting or being able to take a beat and then react, it's very difficult for some of us. And for those of you who do it better, I'm sure you would like to even improve it a little bit more. So a quote was mentioned by Bishop Sam, and I'm going to read the whole quote. I looked it up because he was talking about being loving and that our intention should always be love and to speak and do things from a loving space. And yet sometimes, even though our intention is to be loving, we may not really hit the mark. And that's the whole thing about, what they call sin is really missing the mark. And we've talked about that. It's not that you're the worst person in the world. It's that you started out trying to be loving and you missed. You made the wrong decision. You did something you wish you could take back. So it's not that we're going to be perfect. Take a deep breath on that. It's not that we're going to be perfect. God doesn't even expect us to be perfect. There is perfection in the Trinity, but we're not in the Trinity. We may have like a little breath of life of the Trinity, but we are not Jesus and we are not God. Even though there may be a little bit of breath in there from God, but we are not God. Therefore, we are all human and we cannot be perfect on this side of death. So perfection is not the thing. And when we try to be loving and then we're like, oh, that didn't work out the way I would have wanted it to. And as a matter of fact, it turned out really, really badly. And I posted that post, even though I was given several opportunities not to post it. I still posted that post, or I still shared in that gossip, or I still did whatever we would have done. That if we had done it in front of the person or the group that we would come face to face with, we would be really, really upset with ourselves. And we would also be just mortified that someone knew or found out that we had done such an unloving thing. So I'm going to read the entire quote from Thomas Merton in a book that he wrote. It's called The Merton Prayer in his book, Thoughts in Solitude. So the book is Thoughts in Solitude, and it's from a line, The Merton Prayer. And here it is. My Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think that I am following your will does not mean that I am actually doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope I have that desire in all that I am doing. So what Bishop Sam had mentioned based on that quote, that if we want to be loving and we want to walk the talk and talk the talk of love, then before we make a major decision, even in a conversation, before we think about something we're going to say to respond back to someone, our first thought would be, is this a loving thing to say? Is this a loving thing to do? Is this the time to say this? Is it the best time? So that's a little variation of what Thomas Merton actually said, because he was talking about his relationship with God. But aren't we all the hands and feet of Jesus and trying to be Jesus on earth and do the will of God? And that means that when we're in relationship with each other, when we're trying to break down what post I want to post about this egregious thing that this regime has done this time, this moment, all the breaking news, all the things, that we settle ourselves probably first thing in the morning before we turn on social media. That's going to be my plan before I even check what happened overnight, to ground myself in this prayer of, may I always respond in the most loving way. May I be aware of how I'm responding before I start responding. Now, like I said, there's not going to be perfection in this plan. And yet, the more we practice this, I know the better we're going to get at it, because we all have the ability to change our behaviors, to learn a new thing. We are all wired to evolve. Evolution has been throughout the entire creation story. Everything evolved. And someone said on Facebook today that, there were slaves in the Bible, and if there are slaves in the Bible and there's not any quote that says that there shouldn't be slaves, what do you think of that? And I started to post something, but I didn't. And it's not because of this quote, but I just was tired. I didn't want to try to think about how to say it without getting blowback. However, my thoughts to you, I will say, is that there are a lot of things in the Bible about how people lived and what people did, because it is a historical compilation of people trying to survive in wilderness and trying to survive without even knowing in the beginning if there was a God, and trying to figure out who God was. So it's really a book about a historical compilation of how people lived, how they survived, and the good and the bad of what choices they made. Now, slaves might have been just normal back then, but those slaves were not the slaves that we took from their homeland and brought them into the cargo of boats, chained to each other into the boat, and brought over here to be beaten and treated horribly and kept as slaves with no payment and very harsh conditions. Not the same thing, people. So it might have been their custom to have slaves, but it was also their custom to treat beggars and people with illnesses that they didn't understand as outcasts. It was also their tradition and their way of living to stone people without really knowing all the facts. So we've got to be very careful when we use the Bible as a factual way of how we should punish people or how we should treat people. All of the Old Testament is a compilation of those historical lives of people who were still evolving. And goodness sakes, I would not want anybody to take a snapshot of what we're being exposed to now in the leadership and have somebody later say, oh, well, look, that's how they did it, so we should do it again. No, people. Once we get the squatter in the regime out, we should really take stock in changing some laws to make sure that this never, ever, ever happens again. Ever. So we are living in a time of crisis that will end one day. I know it's going to end. And at the end of that, I want us to put in loving laws that would prevent anyone from ripping up our Constitution, or anyone from killing people just because they don't think your way, or deporting people from our country because they don't look like us and we don't want them here. We were all immigrants, my friends. And those of you who are progressive, who are probably the only people that listen to my podcast, but you progressive people like me know that we did not find America or found it. The Native Americans were already living on this land, and we are the immigrants. We are the ones who wiped out through the Trail of Tears the Native Americans that were living on this land. And so we have nothing to stand on but the bad choices and behaviors of our ancestors. And you may say, well, I didn't do it. And yet, what are we doing now? I love this quote too. What would you do differently if you lived back when the African Americans were being brought by boat to serve your farm? What would you do differently? And even if you can't place your head back then, what are you doing differently now? What are you doing to stop this regime from stomping on our Constitution, from killing people in the streets, from all of the atrocities that are being committed in people's minds and hearts and publicly. What are we doing now? And so if we're not speaking up, if we're not helping the cause of bringing light to this, we're not any different than all those who stayed silent throughout the entire evolution of our lives here on this planet. That's what I mean by saying it's not going to be a perfect ride for us. When we are wanting to desire to please God, and we're wanting to be loving to one another and speak that love of Jesus to everybody else, we have to take stock of how we are going to change it. What are we going to do differently? How are we going to make this shift between being reactionary and planning whatever we post to come from a place of love or compassion? Not that we're going to stop speaking the truth. I think my head would explode if I could not speak this truth to the power. But how am I going to do it? Clearly, I'm going to need to take a beat before I post anything or before I share something. And I do repost a whole lot of things as sound bites and now I need to evaluate whether or not those sound bites and the things that I share just to keep you up to date are things that really need to be shared. And what comments will I make about things on my own post? A lot of times I'll just say deplorable. Sometimes I call something brilliant because somebody did a parody of something that happened, but they did it in a fun way to give us more information. But I know there are times that I fall into being just as ugly as I felt when I read something or when I saw something. So my task is to really actually figure out, how can I embrace the idea that even though I want to be loving and I miss the mark, I'm not always going to be loving. And what will I do to recover from that? How will I not beat myself up terribly because I continue to miss the mark during this time that we are all struggling in? So there are two layers to this. It's what are we going to do differently so that we can really mindfully and maybe prayerfully ask how to be loving in the situation, even though it might, by Thomas Merton's prayer, saying that if I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you, well, the desire does please God, but that doesn't mean that what I did ultimately pleased God. And then we have to really take stock of that and go back to God and confess that and try again. Whew, it's exhausting. But the alternative is that nothing will change. So no matter how many times I might have to go back to confession with God and say, I really blew it. I knew what I needed to do. I knew what was loving. I knew what was pleasing. And I was just ticked off. And I posted this. I could go back and delete it, of course. But it's out there somewhere. And somebody's got it and somebody's shared it. And you're never going to get it all back. That's the thing I always also need to remember. Is that once I put it out there, somebody's got it. And it will eventually continue to come back. So what does it mean to actually be loving? It means that we have to be mindful of every thought and word that we say. And when we don't, when we forget to, when we intentionally mess up because we're that angry, we really need to not just blow that off, but I think we need to prayerfully go back to confession with God and let God know that we are taking responsibility of that. And we can either try to fix it, or we can just continue to open our hearts to being loving and to pleasing God in what we intend to do, and hopefully be able to be pleasing to God with what we actually did. There's a lot of people right now, and I'm not omitting myself at all. There are a lot of us who really don't care what we say in retaliation to things that are happening in the world today. We're fed up, we're bold, we're angry, and we're ready to just spew it back. And when I listened to Bishop Sam today, coming from that place of love where he does this himself is that before he responds to a question, he asks himself, is this the most loving thing that I can say? Is this the most loving time to say it? His reflection on that is the time where he can make that decision as to what to say, how to say it, or even to say it. And if he does find out that, in reflection, if he looks back and he finds out that he missed the mark, I have no doubt in my mind that he goes back and prayerfully asks for forgiveness. I would love to be that intentional. I would love to be that aware of my own impulses. And so it's a journey that we take every single day of being a little bit better than we were the day before. We are still evolving, my friends. We're still evolving, and it's okay. It is okay not to be perfect. It is okay to be angry. It is okay to feel overwhelmed. It is okay to be tired. And it is okay to start over, to get new energy, to feel more loving, to be a little bit more patient, to be aware of what we're saying and how we're saying it, and to always choose, is this going to please me? Is it going to please God? Is it going to please the person in front of me? And to really care about that, to unlock that door at our heart that we bolted so that we could protect our soul. And yet, because we bolted our soul, we can't let the soul come out and be loving and care about what we think, say, and do. So this is our opportunity to unlock the door to our soul and our heart and choose again to be the person that we were before all of this started. The more loving form of us, the more caring, the more energetic, the more empathic. We have to put it back into the universe so that the universe can multiply that instead of multiplying the actions of this regime. That's how we take it all back, by putting all of the good stuff out into the universe to overwhelm, surprise, and stop what this regime is trying to accomplish. We are the light. Let's shine brightly and care about whether or not what we're about to think, say, or do is loving. Thank you, everybody, for honoring me with your time today. If you want to catch that, The Unintentional Heretic with the Reverend Greg Ferrand, please go to empoweredmidge.podbean.com and look for today's episode, and you will find a link to that podcast. You will also find links to my book and also to a complimentary session with me as a coach where we can get to know each other a little bit better and see whether or not coaching is something that you want to pursue with me. Also, you can check out our Facebook group, Gay with God, where we do a monthly Zoom group entitled My Faith Journey. If you need support from just common folks like us that want to sit around and talk once a month about what's going on in the world and how can we manage it, please answer all of the questions once you find the Gay with God group, and then you can be invited inside. If you are listening to this podcast and are questioning whether you can be gay and be in relationship with the God of your understanding, if you identify as LGBTQIA+, are not even sure if you are gay, God has always been within you. Even when you didn't know it, you have always been gay with God. Thank you, everybody. Stay tuned to see how you can join the Gay with God community. And as always, you are loved. I want to invite you to become a part of the Gay with God community. How can you do that? Stay connected by messaging me your thoughts and comments in the comment section under the downloads of the show on the Gay with God show page. Subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen and share so we can increase our community outreach and be a light to those who are struggling to claim their faith. Consider being a sponsor so I can highlight your service in our community. We are all worthy of respect and a relationship with the God of our understanding. I want to thank you in advance for supporting this podcast. Together, we as a community will keep this show visible and our community stronger. Deep gratitude to my friend Tim McClendon of Tim McClendon Music for allowing me to use an excerpt from Interlude 4, a song found on his CD entitled Sundance.